will post this to after the webinar. And so like all of our webinars, you can find them on our YouTube channel, and you can go and learn more, catch up on what you missed. We don't have a lot of announcements for today, but the group presenting, I first heard their talk through ESP, and they have a group that offers quarterly discussions. This was yesterday, so I apologize for not sending it out. But they do have a quarterly discussion. If you're a member of ESP, you can join their group, the ESP Urban Cultural Diversity Affinity Group, and the information can be found on espnational.org. So we have a poll we're going to share really quickly for everyone to self-identify. So just answer a couple of questions, and then we'll get started with our presentation. So we'll give you a couple seconds here to finish up our poll. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to our group. They're going to introduce themselves and get started with our presentation for this month.
That poll didn't work. I'm just sorry.
Uh-oh.
I mean, I had like 2 seconds to answer, and then it was gone.
We'll leave it up for a second. Should we reshare? I don't know what's going on. There we go. We brought it back up again. We'll give you a second and then we'll hand it over.
Can you put it in the chat?
Oh, they could probably go ahead and start sharing their screen.
Okay. Yep. You can start sharing your screen. We'll see if we can't put it in the chat. I don't know what's going on with the poll. As usual, stuff works before we start, and then, you know, we get started and it doesn't work.
It's a Zoom poll, so you
over.
cannot put it in the chat.
Yeah, we're getting answers now, so we have almost half of the participants. So just keep answering if you don't mind.
Very good. So while folks are completing the poll, I'll take a moment to introduce our group. We are members of the National Association of Extension 4-H Youth Development Professionals, which is an association of 4-H and youth serving professionals across the country. And we have a subgroup at the national level for our Diversity and Inclusion Working Group. So the folks that are going to be introduced to you and presented shortly are all folks who are youth serving educators, and I'll let them introduce their own names and what their role is with their state. But we've come together to build this presentation on building community, on recognizing implicit bias and microaggressions as barriers. And as was mentioned, we presented it to a national association, which is Epsilon Sigma Phi, which is built of educators across all extension realms: agriculture, family living, community development, and youth professionals. So we are very grateful for the invitation to come to Master Gardeners specifically. My introduction: Kayla Oberstadt, pronouns she, her, hers. I am a regional program manager for Wisconsin 4-H, and this is my 8th year working with extension programs. I'd like to turn it to Shree next to introduce herself.
Hello, and thank you for having us today. I am Shreemoyee Ghosh. I go by Shree if that's easier. I am part of University of Florida, and I'm a county 4-H extension educator. This past year, I was the chair for that national DEI committee, and the purpose of that committee is we have educators from all over in extension, as well as from universities, join that group, and we sort of go over all the new projects, all the new curriculums that focus towards diversity, inclusion, and it is also a safe space for us as educators to get together and navigate some of the challenges and barriers we have with this kind of work. So once again, thank you for having us, and I will pass it on to Ani.
Ani, you're muted.
Sorry. I'm Anindita Das. My pronouns are she and her. I go by Ani, and I work for Iowa State University and College of Design. I worked for Extension for 6 years, and 3 years of my time was with 4 years actually of my time was with 4-H. I worked as the professional development diversity inclusion specialist, and that's how I was part of the NEA 4-H YDP diversity group. And I got to know all these amazing people. And currently for College of Design, I work as the diversity, equity, inclusion strategist. And I pass it on to Liliana.
Hello, everyone. Sorry, the light in my office is automatic, so it shut off. So, I'm Liliana Vega. I am the 4-H Youth Development Advisor in San Diego and Orange counties. I'm also part of the NE 4-H YDP Diversity Inclusion Work Group. And I will go ahead and pass it on to Melinda.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Melinda Garcia. I'm one of 2 4-H program coordinators here in Oregon Lane County. I'm tasked with outreach. I've been with Extension 8 years, and also being a member from the NAE DEI committee. I'm also on the national level for ESP, a co-chair for our UCDA group. So very much an advocate. I'll pass it on to Laura.
Unfortunately, Laura is not going to be present today, but she did
That's right.
plan with us, and we presented as a group. So this presentation is a part that we created for a national presentation. And Laura Valencia, she's from University of Florida. She's a 4-H agent, and I don't know how many years she has been, more than like 10 years, and she's in Osceola County in Florida. Thank you.
Excellent. So with no further ado, we'd like to welcome you to our presentation, folks. We've got some session objectives here to recognize that implicit bias is inherently found within all of us. And so while the topics might be hard to recognize in ourselves, and then sometimes it's easier to see in other people, we have to kind of do that self-reflection from time to time. So through some interactive discussion in our virtual setting today, we invite you to a brave space, which Melinda will discuss here shortly. And we also want to recognize that because we are recording, that we will accept any anonymous questions sent to one of our presenters, and we will withhold your name or affiliation and just simply bring up the question on your behalf. But again, knowing that safe space of not affiliating your name with a question, we want to make sure that folks can have those things answered. In addition, when the presentation is completely done and recording ends, we can open up for some verbal dialogue if that's more comfortable for some of you. So Brave Spaces will kick us off. We'll go through some content of definitions of each one of our terms, and then most importantly, taking action, how to disarm and intervene when you see something to stand up for, and how to respond appropriately. So let's take it away, Melinda.
Thank you, Ms. Kayla. So we talked about brave spaces, and one of the things is understand that we all have implicit biases, and that we here as a result to have those courageous conversations. We want to be able to recognize those emotions and discomfort. What's causing us to feel this way? Why? What's triggering this emotional trauma? Is it guilt? What happened? Are you willing to share that to have a better understanding and get different perspectives from others? Because this is a whole idea of being in this brave space, being able to discuss it openly. Next. Also being able to have respectful sharing. And that I mean that being able to stand up, not only for yourself, but also being able to acknowledge to step back and let others share. Give them the opportunity so you can gain a better understanding and take time to listen and be able to reflect, to reframe and renew and have a different outlook or perspective based on those courageous conversations. And one of the most important things is being able to share those personal experiences. Again, you're speaking from the first person, this happened to me. And you're not, in doing so, you're not representing anybody else. So this is going to allow us to have a brave space here. Okay, so also I'm doing group agreement. So in this group agreement, we're speaking from our own experiences, as I mentioned. And hold on. We are here for the sake of transparency. And that's one of the things that people kind of don't want to speak up. I mean, I'll give an example that we see social media, and I'm guilty of it. We see a lot of things and we can either laugh, or there's these things, people filming it, they know it's wrong, but they do nothing about it. And you know that it's wrong, but how do we take that stance? And being able to have the understanding and be open and willing to learn. Again, asking for clarification. Why did this happen? I'm not sure I understood what you said. Did it come out that way? I'm sorry that I hurt your feelings. So being able to be open and willing about it, and then being able to listen. Again, we can hear things, but are we listening generously? Are we respecting others and what they're actually saying? Remember, we're coming from different backgrounds, different cultures, different cultural backgrounds and educational backgrounds, and it's going to allow us to have those diversity within this group. And then the sharing space is allowing everyone to have a voice. I know people are here, but sometimes you might be here, but you're not present. And what I mean is that you don't want to participate. And that's one of the most important things when we're having courageous conversations, is to be able to have this shared space, knowing that there's transparency and we're all here for the sake of learning and understanding why we have these implicit biases. And also being able and willing to challenge and disrupt this racist pattern. So we all have those implicit biases. But what are we doing? We need to be able to challenge that and take a stand. Well, why do I have this racist view? Why do I have this pattern? What's attributing to this? And being able to understand it and have a different perspective. And lastly, respect the confidentiality of the people and the informations of the stories being shared here today. Again, taking those lessons learned, internalize it. How's that affecting me? Do I have a different perspective? And knowing that we're not going to share names of where we got this, but being able to say, you know what, wow, it really hit me hard, or I didn't know that I think this way, or I need to change my views because of this. So again, being able to understand that we are speaking of transparency, and through the shared experiences, we're going to have a better understanding of those microaggressions and implicit biases.
Next, we'll hear from Ani in defining implicit bias. Just make sure you're not muted, Ani.
I know, I'm so sorry. I was going on talking and I didn't realize, because I'm using two devices now. So you all heard Melinda talk so many times about implicit bias. So it's very important to understand implicit bias, how it happens, and what are some of the root causes, because she said everyone has implicit bias. So what's the root cause of why it happens? It's very important to understand. And then what happens when implicit bias becomes visible? We need to understand that. So implicit bias, as it's shared, refers to an automatic and unconscious stereotype that drive people to behave and make decisions in certain ways. And as you know, the Yale study that Gilliam and his co-authors shared, implicit biases, including implicit bias, are pervasive across people and institutions. But then what happens, it's problematic when we use those implicit bias to make our decisions, to work on it, and to use it and make it visible. So that's why implicit bias is something that we all need to be working on. Next slide, please. And then it's very important to understand what are the causes, what are the root causes of our implicit bias. I like the work of McGee because she talks very well how implicit bias is facilitated in our everyday life, and how that is without knowing, we use it. We are biased. Our tendency to make one example the story of all of them. We generalize our experiences with one person or what we have seen in media to all people of that same racial group. We've seen that so many times happening over and over again after the 2016 election, with a certain group of people, that it was generalized that all people of this country or this community are this way. And so, coming from an Indian background, all the time, I see that bias among school teachers, among project programs. oh, you are from Indian background, so you should be good in math and science, which is completely not true. I am not. I have worked hard to be well, but that doesn't mean that I'm good on it, because people generalize that all people from Indian community are good in math and science because they see in media the CEOs of all the STEM companies are Indians. So they assume that all Indians have a strong background in science and technology and engineering and mathematics and things like that. So we create psychological shortcuts or unconscious sticky notes in our brain. And that schema or stereotype of that person sticks with us, and we are unwilling to think otherwise. And so everyone is like, if you would know that we are socialized into these implicit bias through our media, through our education, through our systems, we are socialized into it. We are not born with it. So that's the best part of it, is since we are not born with it, we are, socialized or nurtured into it, we can definitely change our biases. And that's the reason why we are having this training. Next slide, please. So what happens when implicit biases are visible in our actions? That's when they become microaggressions. Chester Price was a Harvard professor, and his conception of subtle and stunning daily racial offenses or microaggressions remains salient. It's such a powerful work that he did, even though it was 50 years ago. That work is so salient to understanding of microaggression. In one of 1970 seminal publication, Offensive Mechanism, Pierce extends this concept and first introduces the term microaggression. And he suggests that, these racial offenses are so severe to the health and well-being of the people who experience it that he suggested therapeutic processes for them. So microaggressions can be very, very harmful for somebody who's experiencing it on everyday basis. And this work of Pierce was further elaborated by critical race theory. Critical race theorists have built on over the years to define microaggressions as verbal or non-verbal. So oftentimes it's not verbal, it can be non-verbal also, that assaults that directed towards people of color, often carried out in subtle and automatic and unconscious forms. And I'll explain further how does that happen. And then the layered assaults based on race and its intersections with gender, class, sexuality, language, migration status, phenotype, accent, and surname. All these layered assaults can also create microaggression. Like if you enter into a classroom and you see the names of people that are in Asian names, and you can pronounce it. And if a teacher says, oh, let me look at these names, let me see if I can pronounce any of them, then I will pick that person to go for this activity. So that immediately creates an assault or a feeling of, dismissed, offended, threatened by the student. So a student, or by our youth, or by our people with whom we are interacting in these engagements or anything. So, and another aspect of microaggression is that it is a cumulative assault that takes a psychological, physiological, and academic toll on people of color. So these assaults help us identify that often subtle acts of racism that can emerge in all facets of our interactions, like as I mentioned, in our everyday conversations, in our everyday interactions. Next slide, please. Pierce's seminal description of the concept of microaggression laid the groundwork of Daryl Sue. And you all probably know that Daryl Sue and his colleagues' work in 2007 is so pioneer that we still continue to use their work and everything understanding with microaggression. They define racial aggressions, microaggressions as subtle, daily, and unintentional racial slights committed against the people or the members of racialized groups. Sue and his colleagues use this phenomena to similar terms as everyday racism, as we've been hearing that it's everyday racism that is characterized by small instances of discrimination that are routine and chronic. Microaggressions can be identified as sudden, stunning, dispiriting transactions that deeply affect person of color. It's a feeling of nobody sees you, or it's the feeling that you are threatened or you're offended, stereotyped, discounted, or attacked. Like we've always talked about this phrase that people will not remember what you did with them, but they will always remember how you made them feel. So that's how it is. It hurts you to the core. But you cannot say, because it's not anything overt. It's like, it's so subtle that you feel that, oh, what do I talk about it? So despite this overall decline in the overly offensive racist actions, these aggressive slides towards targeted racial or ethnic groups persist and have been found to connect aggressive tendencies among them. So, and most of the time, these forms are, these microaggressions come up in these three forms. So I just want you to understand that, because it's very helpful that you can have a check on your own actions when we are working with others to see that, oh, did I do this? Was that intentional or was that unintentional? How did this come by? Why did I do it? Just to kind of have a reflection on ourselves. The first one is microassault, are deliberate and intentional slights and insults that are meant to hurt intended victim through name calling, avoidant and behavior, or purposeful discriminatory actions. Intentional microassaults would be abusive language, or moving a purse or a bag in an elevator when we are around certain people. Have you ever experienced that? When you enter an elevator, people just move away from you. So that is a way of microassault. For example, jokes made on to degrade people with different racial and ethnic identity, disabled or gender identities. I've seen so many times school students, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th graders talking to their friends, like in a joking way that, oh, that's so gay. And that's so not right. And, as if you are working with young people, it's a great opportunity to talk to them that that's not appropriate. That's a way of microassault. So to kind of inform them that this is what it is. The second form is micro-invalidation. It's when someone attempts to discredit or minimize the experience of a person who is underrepresented. For instance, an Asian coworker is sharing time that when they felt disrespected, and we interrupt them saying that what they are saying doesn't make sense, or we contradict what they have shared. That, oh, you're saying something that does not actually mean anything. That's not how it happened. This is what it means, why it happened, and you try to justify that. Micro-insults are very rude and insensitive comments that subtly disrupt a person's racial heritage, their identity. This could be assuming that someone is not smart based on their appearance, or implying certain people do not have morals, or also includes assuming someone won't understand a new process at work because English is not their first language. This creates a feeling that the person does not belong there. And you must have seen that, at least I've heard so many times, when I came to this, oh, how do you speak English so well? How did you do that? Like, because you don't look, anything like us. How can you speak English? But, I come from India. We were ruled by 200 years by the Britishers. We have everything English. And so English is almost our first language, even though it's not. And so, and I also want to share that, based on that, my son has also faced discrimination. Like when he entered grade school, he was reading level 3 books. But then since we had to check a box in the application saying that, do you have another language that you speak at home? Yes, parents do speak at home, but children do not. But then that's not assumed. And, he was put into ESL classes. So there are different ways that how this happens and how people take it. And Dr. Su later expressed that this research was also examined how microaggression impacts religious group, gender identities, and those who are living with disability and LGBT community. So I think the most important thing that the frequency and impact of microaggression may increase with intersectionality of gender, sexual orientation, and additional stigmatized identities. This is why it connects so well to the next slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Ani. That was really great. And it was a great segue to this slide. What is intersectionality? So if any of you are comfortable, you are more than welcome to unmute and share your definition or understanding of intersectionality. or you can put it in the chat box. And I'll give you a minute to think about what that means looking at this picture. So Ani was talking about, she mentioned about layered identities a little bit ago. So anything in that aspect that makes sense to you, what intersectionality might mean? So while you guys are thinking, and some of you hopefully are going to put something in the chat box, I'm going to go ahead and read the definition of what intersectionality means. And this definition is from our AEBC, that is Access, Equity, Belonging Committee. That is, again, a national working committee. And according to them, intersectionality is the notion that identities such as gender, race, class, and others can be examined in isolation from one another. They intersect in individuals' lives, in society, in societal systems, and are mutually constitutive. So what does that actually mean? So intersectionality refers to the recognition that various aspects of an individual's identity, such as gender, race, class, and more, are not isolated from each other. Instead, they intersect and interact, shaping a person's experiences, perspectives, and the opportunities. Just like Ani gave an example of her son, how that was not an opportunity, even though, you know, he's reading grade level 3rd, but based on that checkbox, that was not an opportunity for him where he could just not be in that class. So this concept acknowledges that aspects of aspects are mutually constitutive, which means that they combine to create a unique and multifaceted experience that cannot be fully understood if we are just examining each factor in isolation. So if we are just thinking of gender and we're just thinking about ethnicity, that is not what intersectionality means. It means that all of these different identities, as you see in that little diagram, that those are all the different kinds of identities for a person. And typically they overlap when we are presenting ourselves in the society. In the context of microaggression and biases, intersectionality plays a crucial role in understanding how those things operate. Biases, as Ani and Melinda mentioned, that stem from deep-seated stereotypes that we have and the discriminatory beliefs that are perpetuated by society and its structure, and the different kinds of medias that we have. Social media is one of the bigger and the most prominent one. And it recognizes, intersectionality recognizes that an individual's experience of biases are not solely determined by one aspect of their identity, but is a complex interplay of the various aspects and identities. So for instance, let's consider racism through the lens of intersectionality. Racism isn't solely about one's racial identity, but it is also influenced by factors like gender, socioeconomic status, and more. So in that case, a Black woman may experience racism differently than a Black man due to the intersection of gender and race. Her experiences are shaped by both her gender identity and her racial identity, resulting in a unique set of challenges and discrimination that cannot be fully comprehended if we examined racism and sexism in isolation. So to bring that all together, intersectionality helps us recognize those biases that they are not isolated occurrences. They are interconnected and influenced by various facets of an individual's identity, and this understanding is crucial in addressing and dismantling the biases, the inherent biases, in a comprehensive and effective manner. We are in that education sector. We get a chance and opportunity to work with various backgrounds and various identities. So all of this work starts from the me aspect, in me understanding how I am acting in the society, how I am perceiving things in my society, and what are my biases. So this presentation that we are talking about today is more so for self-education, self-understanding, because things start from you and me. That is how it starts. So with that, I will pass it on to Liliana. She is going to take you guys through this amazing activity that will help you understand how our intrinsic biases and microaggressions come into play. Thank you.
Yeah, and before I do that, I do want to answer answer a question on the chat box. So somebody mentioned that they're frustrated with body type not included intersectionality, as she sees people treated differently for being unusually small, petite, short, tall, obese, and do we know why body type fatism is never listed on any other thing on this slide? Intersectionality can be very broad. So when we showed the slide, it's examples of intersectionality. It doesn't mean it's all inclusive. It's like diversity. When we talk about diversity, diversity is very broad. It's very complex. And often people, when we talk about diversity, say something like race and ethnicity and only attribute diversity to things of that nature. But we know that diversity can be education level, it could be organization level, it could also be socioeconomic, it could be disability, it could be body type, it could be all of those different things. So I would agree that there is other things that could be added into intersectionality, and we are socialized to be biased to many, many things, and body type being one of them. So I can share your frustration. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to this poll everywhere. And I am going to, here we go. So I'm going to ask everybody to use the link that's in the chat box, or you can use the QR code that is on my screen to answer this question. So this is just an activity where we talk about hidden messages. So I don't want the literal what this is saying. I want like what hidden message, what kind of micro assaults, insults, micro insults and all that stuff, like what is this saying when we do this? So when I say, can I just call you, you know, whatever name, as a way to shorten someone's name or making up a nickname for a person of color who with a name that is not common in white culture. So we've had this happen quite often. And I know that my dad, I was like, why do they call you Roy? When I started hearing people call him Roy, his name's Aurelio. And like, I was like, Dad, why are they calling you Roy? My first realization as a kid of like, oh, I can't pronounce your name. Okay, so like, what's the micro insults or the micro assaults, or like, what's the hidden message behind this? So once you go on that link, you should be able to type. You can do that on your phone as well or computer. So like, what is the hidden message?
Liliana, I think it is waiting to be activated.
Oh, I guess it would help if I activate it. Thank you.
Now it's open. Thank you.
Yeah, so again, I don't want like what somebody might call somebody, but like what's the hidden message behind when somebody says, can I just call you, and then give somebody a nickname because they can't pronounce that person's name. Yeah, so definitely like, I don't care enough to learn to pronounce your name. I'm too lazy. I don't care enough about you. Your culture is something new to me. Obviously, they can't pronounce their name. Implies a person's name is not important. Definitely a micro invalidation. Somebody isn't willing to try. I'm not even going to try to address you the way you want to be addressed because I don't care. I don't want to take the time. So I'm just going to call you what I want. You aren't worth my effort. It's definitely dehumanizing a person because they are not part of a dominant culture. And definitely not creating a welcoming or caring environment. And it's way too hard to figure out your name. So these are all, again, when we're talking about microaggressions, these are just examples of like, we even if well-intended, right, the impact is negative. So it's really important that we realize how microaggressions do have hidden meanings behind them, and they can be harmful. So we'll go to another one, just so we can get a few different examples. So thank you all for participating. But we'll go to another one just so we can get a few examples in. So what's the microaggression around America is a melting pot? So again, not the literal meaning, but what's the microaggression behind it? What's the hidden message that we're telling people when we say, well, America's a melting pot?
Can you refresh the screen, Liliana?
Yes. Is it not? Okay. Oh, activate. Okay, here we go. Yeah, definitely that we should, you can't keep your culture, everybody assimilates, people lose their prior identities, we're a country of many races and ethnicities and immigrants. So that's what we know, right? But the hidden message is that you should abandon your culture to blend into US culture, that we're mixed, so your race doesn't matter, you don't matter, your culture doesn't matter. Assimilation is definitely the intent there. This means to me that you need to behave more like whomever said it. Definitely you should be more like me, right? Kind of statement. You're not validating other people's cultures. You want to assimilate to dominant culture, be more like me or us. And there's we know that there's a lot of different cultures living here, but by saying America is a melting pot, we're really saying you should be like one culture, and that's dominant culture. Sounds like people come from all over, but they lose their identity, then we're now all the same, definitely, and that everybody should merge again to US culture. So definitely all of these different things. I'm going to head and stop so we can go on to the next one. And Shannon, I did notice you had a question related to this. I'm not sure if it was the last question or this question, but you're welcome to unmute yourself.
Thank you so much. Just real quick, when someone introduces themselves to me and says, like, my name is Yolanda, but you can call me Yo-Yo, or like something like that, it's important to me to use their actual name. I want to know that about someone, but if they give me the option to just call them Ray, I don't know how to deal with that.
Yeah, I can answer that. So we respect people's preferred names. And so some of us have been socialized, whether we like it or not. I often, if you ask my mom, my name is Liliana, but I will be totally okay with people calling me Lily. I've been socialized to go ahead and make it easy, but I also really like the name Lily. So, if you're close to me, you absolutely know that I go by Lily, and you're welcome to call me Lily. That is one of my preferred names. I also don't mind Liliana. There is some people out there who don't like their real names for whatever reason, right? And so you go with what they prefer. And if I'm a person who I'm okay with both Liliana and both with Lily, so in that case, you can call me both. But there is some people out there who don't like their don't like their real actual name. And so we call them by their preferred name. So it's really what the person prefers to be called. And that can happen through a conversation of what do you prefer. Sheree, do you have something to add?
I was just adding because in the very beginning, I did introduce myself as, hi, I'm Shreemoyee Ghosh, and I go by Shree, if that's easier. So if somebody's stating that, you can always go that route, and know that if you're sincerely trying to pronounce somebody's name and you do it incorrectly, nobody gets offended in that sense. It has to be that intention that you're trying, and you can always apologize, like, hey, I'm trying to learn this, will you help me learn? But if somebody gives you an option and an alternative, you are at that point more than welcome to choose whichever. If you want to just still continue to try pronouncing Shreemoyee, good for you. And if you think, oh, I'm just going to say Shree because she offered me that option, that is totally acceptable.
And somebody did mention that our culture does make people dislike their own name. That is very true. I often have to like try to teach young people that there is value in their name and pronouncing it in Spanish. And I have tried really hard to not whitewash my name anymore, although I catch myself doing it still quite often. So I try to be like, my name is Liliana instead of my name is Liliana, right? Because it's pronounced differently. But I've been taught my whole life to whitewash it. So now I'm actually trying to unwhitewash it and like be okay with pronouncing my name Liliana, the way that it's meant to be pronounced. So yes, totally agree with that. And sometimes we ourselves have to fight, again, the anti-racist things that we've been taught. So we have to fight ourselves. So yes, agree with that. So let's just go on to the next one. And I think this will probably be our last one because I know we're running out of time, right? Okay. So why do you always have to be so loud? Stated to a Black person. So what's the microaggression behind this, the hidden message? What are we really saying to somebody who is Black when we say, why do you have to be so loud? Yeah, definitely we're saying you are fitting the stereotype of a Black person. So it's reinforcing that stereotype. It's whitewashed as microaggression in itself. Yeah, like, well, what level do we have to be at, right? People are loud. You're generalizing a group. The way that you've grown up speaking and the culture you've grown up is not acceptable here. Absolutely. I'm uncomfortable with your Black culture. You should be quiet. Loudness is scary and unwanted. As a Black person, first of all, you shouldn't be speaking, right? That could be one of the hidden messages we're trying to state. Always as if everyone who's Black is always loud. Yeah, not all Black people are loud. Like just, not all Latinos are loud. Not all white people are loud. We have some very quiet. We have some very loud. But we just make the assumption that if a Black person is loud, all of them are loud. Right? So we'll go ahead and end with this one. But as you can see, microaggressions can actually be very harmful. It is definitely white supremacist by saying there's something wrong with being loud. And so why do we have to make judgment on definition of like what level of loudness you're supposed to be? I have absolutely seen this one play out in many ways. I see us squash Black kids' liveliness and colorfulness and like amazing energy that they have by like trying to like tone people down, and it's just like it's not cool. Yeah, definitely we let them keep having fun, and that's exactly what I say. But again, we're making a standard of how people should talk, act, and all of these things. So when we say statements like this, we're saying you're not fitting our standard, for sure. So I will go ahead and end here, and we'll go back to the presentation just because I know we're running out of time. There's never enough time for this. So take it back to you, Kayla.
Great. Thank you so much, Liliana. And I do want to recognize one of the comments that was put into the anonymous poll everywhere was, is whitewashing also microaggression? And recognizing as a white person, it identifies something that is made to seem of white culture, which I would speak for and say it could be. Do others want to jump in on that?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Whitewashing and for people of color, we are forced to fit dominant culture in many, many ways. So I always say that we do have to be whitewashed. We have to do what we call code switching, which is going between being Mexican in my case and being white Americanized, right? And it's something that I have to do in order to feel like I'm going to be accepted within white culture and in my profession. Absolutely have to whitewash myself all the time. And so, yeah, in itself, it is a microaggression. It is very hard for us mentally, sometimes physically and emotionally, to have to deal with those spaces very often. So it can, I would say that, yes, it often in itself is a microaggression when we have to whitewash ourselves because we can't be our authentic selves, because we get lots of microaggressions when we are. So that's why we tend to whitewash, is to try to minimize the level of microaggressions we get.
And we can't determine what somebody else might feel. This is where intent versus impact comes in, is recognizing that what somebody might say. So if somebody of a different race said to me, a white woman, "You are whitewashing my existence," I might take that differently than a request to, "Can you use my proper name?" Right? There is a different way in acknowledging what is being asked. The intent is still to get to this end result of being recognized for who you are, using the example of a name here. But the impact of what was left on the recipient of the message cannot be determined. So for example, thinking about apologizing once something is said and you recognize like, ooh, ouch, that was harmful. You know what? I can turn around and say, "I'm sorry that you felt this way." Now think about that versus, "I'm sorry I made you feel this way." "I'm sorry I hurt your feelings" is much different than, "I'm sorry your feelings were hurt." So recognizing the validation of owning somebody's own instance in the conflict. So I wanted to make sure that we look at that. And I have an example working with young people. If we can talk about learned behavior and then unlearning behavior, those of us in the 4-H youth development field, those of you in Master Gardeners are working with intergenerational folks. There are going to be times in life where it's easier to unlearn something. And I had the example at a statewide experience in 4-H where we've got individuals from all corners of the state, races, demographics, ages, beliefs. And it was a situation where young ladies felt that they were being persecuted by young boys based on race. Recognizing that being in an elevator where a door closes, that is their experience. The impact that they had was that they could not exit an elevator. And who was surrounding the elevator? Young boys. The young ladies in the elevator represent a minority race and therefore could feel that, and that's real to them. The boys didn't recognize in their own discussions with us as staff that it was racially motivated. Their intent was being silly, but the impact was harmful. And we had that exact situation of, "I'm sorry for what I did," and they had to own what that was. And here, for 12, 13-year-old children to recognize this and learn from it will change how they react in the future when they see how somebody might apologize for something they didn't intend to be taken the wrong way. But it opens that lens. So I wanted to share that as an example. So we can only control our intent. We don't control the impact on the other side. So Melinda, share with us. Let's take some action.
Okay, so for taking action, again, reiterating what's been said, we all have implicit biases, but how we are aware of them and how we manage them is going to help us not to make those generalizations. So it's easy to say, "Oh, them, us," but we have to internalize what's being said. So there's certain actions that we take. So how to intervene and disarm. You create standards of expectations. What are you trying to get out of this conversation? What are the parameters? how is it that we're going to address this? Are we having, and the next thing is identifying actions. What is our topic? What do we choose to talk about? We can't possibly talk about everything. Is it race? Is it ethnicity? Is it education? Is it gender? And the impact, I mean, know that what, like she mentioned right now, intent and impact, how it's going to impact others. But you don't want to address it with a large group. First start with a small group and know that there's that personal space and that brave space to talk about and have those courageous conversations and be able to have different outlets, whether it's speaking or writing, because some people are not going to be as brave as others and share because for whatever reason they feel intimidated by what's going on because of those biases. But again, we all have them. We just have to learn to understand others' perspectives. And as we do that, we're opening up our mind to understand it. And then promoting equity. We make sure that everyone has a fair and equal opportunity to share, including time. What is the scenario? Do we have the same scenario? Are we giving these people an opportunity? So everyone has an equal opportunity. And listening. Of course, listening, we have to invest in this DEI and we need to stay engaged. What are we doing to listen? Are we taking that professional development? Are we taking those extra classes? Are we listening to someone of minority? Are we the aggressor? Are we the receiver? So we have to listen to these things, right? So we have to be able to put it all together and realize how this is going to help us become better at not having a microaggression or a micro assault. And then how to stand up to this. We're taking trainings, we're advocating for someone who doesn't have a voice. I mean, I know I as a former teacher and working with kids, you see those kids bullying these other kids. So you become their advocate, but you also need to let them know, give them that confidence and that self-esteem to be able to share what it is that's on their mind that's bothering them. Well, hey, Miss Garcia, they keep calling me chubby, and they, after a while it gets old and they start crying, well, then you address it, but then you address it with those kids. So give them the opportunity, whether it's adult or kids, to stand up for themselves and be able to share why it is that their feelings are hurt. And as you mentioned, Kayla, I'm sorry you feel that way, or I'm sorry I hurt your feelings are two different things. So being able to choose the right word and then sharing, willingness to share. So again, those vital stories, your experiences, because we all have different experiences. We all have different walks of life, even within our culture. I mean, within our culture, we might grow up Hispanic, but the different age group separates us in how we grew up in the time of, the era that we grew up, because I'm different from my cousins that are 30 years older than me. So I can't imagine what they experience versus my experience and the education versus non-education. So being able to understand that, and which leads us to mind your manners and language. And we all know that it's those hidden messages, as Liliana keeps talking about, but also choosing our words correctly. What words are we choosing? Because words matter. And it's not just the words, it's our body language, our facial, how we're reacting, come with this, whatever. So that says a lot about you and your inability or ability to understand these microaggressions and implicit biases. How did I disrupt that thought? What's going on? Why didn't you say that? Why didn't you say that? But you said it and someone said, but if you said you meant it. So think about what you're saying. You have to be intentional with what we're doing, especially with today's society, with everything that's going on, especially with social media. To see all these wrong people are afraid to stand up to. What are we doing to make sure this doesn't happen again? And using communication, first and foremost, we can address it if we don't talk about it. Being transparent, be bold, stand up and say, what, I've been the only Latina in the room. I'm not afraid to speak up. You have to bring it. And that good thing you bring up and it makes others feel uncomfortable. And it should, because you're the minority. Then you tell them why. And you're able to express that. And it creates this open dialogue, which allows us to have open-ended questions. Give them opportunities to respond and share why it is that they made that comment. Give them, maybe like Liliana, let's do a survey. Let's talk about this. Why are we feeling, having these mixed emotions? We need to share and then come up with some kind of techniques to be able to understand when someone feels uncomfortable that we need to address it right then and there versus brushing it and putting it under the rug. No, we'll do it later. And we know that sometimes later never will come. So we have to be able, again, to be self-aware and be able to manage our actions and our behaviors, because that is telling of who we are. And that's what I have to say, because I know we're pressed for time.
There's a question. Oh, I was saying.
Can't hear you.
Ani, we can't hear you and you're also echoing.
Oh, can't hear you.
I think if someone muted her, you might have to unmute if it was a host that did it.
Let me take a look and see if I can help. So there's a lot of comments and questions in the chat. If the speakers want to start taking a look at those, and then I will share my last slide and I will see if I can't unmute you. Just a minute.
There was a question.
Oh, there we go. We can hear you.
Okay, there was a question in the chat. I think others should unmute themselves. Yeah. I was just saying, this is terrible.
I think you're okay to talk.
Melinda,
Should be okay.
Melinda, can you mute yourself? Yeah, thank you. So I think the idea is to hold people accountable. And if something like this you see, you might want to bring them into speed, telling them that how it has been an act of assault and that, you know, that it should not happen or what happened, and ask them to reflect on it. Thank you.
And I know there's a question about how to like handle a situation where you're a facilitator. It just really depends on the microaggression and what exactly happened, as whether you try to say, let's have a conversation about it, or whether you pull that person aside later on to have a private conversation, or whether you deflect and change the conversation. It just kind of really depends on what the microaggression was, what was said, and the tone, and whether or not you feel safe and all that fun stuff. I do, Vanessa, you have your hand up, so I can unmute yourself if you have a question.
Yeah, if we have time, I'd love to share more. I mean, in this particular situation, I wasn't sure who the exact aggressor was, and I was told about the or they were more like aggressions later after the incident occurred. So I'm just curious if there's any way to handle things like with a group later. And it's so different with youth and kids, but I mean, I was told that there were some women of color in a group among a bunch of white women in our like canning class. In another program that I run, and they were having their like supplies and materials taken from them. And at first they didn't know it was a big deal. And then there was like a second incident where I guess they were approached in the bathroom and they said, "Why are you here?" So those are pretty egregious. And then I asked them, would you like me to take any action? Can you tell me who it was? And they said no. So, of course, moving forward, I'm going to make some changes to really make sure that we're having a safe space. But I'm curious what else I could do, either when reported afterwards, or say it happened and I witnessed it, or, it was reported in the moment. So I'm sorry to keep pushing this, but I keep going to these professional developments to try and learn